Greetings. This is our first video for Chapter 4, which is on forecasting. This chapter I really enjoy. It has a lot of good content that you'll be able to take with you in your careers, especially if you go into some type of operational role in manufacturing or service. And so there's just a lot of really great content in this chapter. One thing I love about the chapter on forecasting is looking forward and trying to predict future events. With taking data that we have from the past, taking people's perceptions and their opinions, taking all of that and putting it together and making educated guesses for future events that are going to happen. And so it's a fun chapter. I really enjoy it. And I've used a lot of the methods that you're going to see in this chapter in my career as well. So between Chapter 4, forecasting, and then these next couple chapters, supply chain, inventory management, and MRP, this is where I've spent a significant portion of my 20-plus year career on these topics and the content that you're going to learn throughout this chapter. So again, I'm excited about it, and hopefully you will be too. So let's dive right into our learning objectives for Chapter 4. We are going to understand the 3 time horizons for forecasting and which models apply to each time horizon. We're going to explain how and when to use the 4 qualitative models. We're going to go over some qualitative models and then some quantitative models. And those quantitative models include the naive model, moving averages, exponential smoothing, and then some trend projections as well. Then we will learn how to measure forecast accuracy. We're going to create some seasonal indexes, and then we're going to conclude with regression and correlation analysis. So there's a lot of content in this chapter, a lot of really good stuff, and just make sure that you're paying attention to all these formulas because you will see them again come test time. So let's dive right into what is forecasting. Well, forecasting and demand planning, this is really the art and science of predicting future events. Okay, so when we're talking about forecasting, it is not a guess. We are not just saying, oh, I'm guessing that next month's sales will be this, or the month after that sales will be that. No, we're taking data and opinions and looking at the historical events to try and make an educated guess or an educated analysis for what the future requirements should be, whether it's a economic forecast, a technological forecast, or a demand-driven forecast is irrelevant. We're taking data to make those predictions about the future. So it's an art. It is absolutely an art. And many firms integrate forecasting with supply chain and capacity management systems to make better operational decisions. So we're taking the data that we have. What did we ship last month? What did we ship the month before that? And what should we plan on for the months going forward? How many people did we need last month and the month before that? And so how many can we predict or forecast that we're going to need for the months going forward? So many firms take this forecasting data and they integrate it into their operational decisions. Accurate forecasts are absolutely necessary. They're needed throughout the supply chain and through all areas of the organization, including accounting, finance, marketing, operations, and distribution. We need to make sure that we have good forecasts, especially when we're talking to finance, right? Finance funds the operation. So if we believe that sales are going to go up and we have to buy more raw material to support that increase in sales, then finance has to be able to fund the operations. Same thing for marketing. If we believe that sales continue to go up and up, marketing is going to create plans that are going to match our forecasts. So this is one of those things where in Chapter 1, we talked about marketing, operations, and finance all need to be intertwined and connected and really communicating well with each other. Same thing when it comes to the forecasting side of the business. All of these groups have to be communicating well, they have to be on the same page, and they have to be articulately communicating our go-forward plans. Demand planning software. We're not going to touch upon that much today. But Chapter 14 is on MRP and ERP, so Materials Requirements Planning and Enterprise Resource Planning. These are systems that integrate all the marketing, inventory, sales, and operations data, and they synchronize it within the supply chain. And that helps us when we're forecasting to be able to look forward and everyone can see the forecast that we've put into our MRP or ERP system. And we'll go into that more in Chapter 14. Okay, so when we talk about forecasting, we need to understand there are various planning horizons. So there's various planning horizons that we generally look at when we're making a forecast, whether it's an economic forecast, a demand-driven forecast, a technology forecast, it doesn't really matter. We need to look at different planning horizons. So short-range forecasts are generally up to about a year, but can be anywhere around 3 months as well. So examples of this would be purchasing, job scheduling, workforce levels, inventory. So what inventory do I need to have on hand within our operations to support our current growth plans or our current forecasts? Short-term forecasts tend to be more accurate than long-term forecasts. So hopefully I say that a few times throughout these next couple of videos and lecture recordings, that short-term forecasts are always more accurate than long-term forecasts. I can predict with far more certainty what my organization is going to do next month than I can 10 years from now. Okay, so short-term forecasts are always more accurate than long-term forecasts. Medium-range forecasts are anywhere from 3 months to 3 years. This could be sales and production planning or budgeting. This is where I spend a lot of time in my current role. I'm generally looking about 1 year out. What do we think sales are going to be? What do we think cost savings are going to be? How do we think growth is going to be, so I can staff the team, and who's going to manage which strategic account going forward. So I spend a lot of my time doing forecasting about 1 year out so that I can support my team. Long-range forecasts are generally 3+ years out or so. These are your long-term strategic type forecasts. So what are we going to do in regards to facility locations or research and development, or which new products do we have in the pipeline that we're currently developing? I have an Apple iPhone, and a new one just came out, but I guarantee Apple's already planning for 2 or 3 releases after that. Those new products that they're developing, they're looking out years and years in advance to try and make those new products happen. So that is a long-range type of forecast and or plan. And so the main takeaway from this slide, though, is short-term forecasts tend to be more accurate, and they employ different methodologies than the longer-term forecasts. We will use different types of forecasts for short range than we will forecasts that are more comprehensive and long-term and support managerial decisions regarding planning products and processes. So there are 3 types of forecasts. There's 3 main types of forecasts, and that's economic forecasts, technological forecasts, and then demand forecasts. Economic forecasts are planning indications that are valuable in helping organizations prepare medium to long range forecasts. So this could be business cycles, inflation, money supply, housing starts, things like that. So the economic forecasts, as you know, our economic forecasts, just like any other forecast, have been they've been wrong because of COVID, right? So for the last few years, things have just been a little bit out of sorts with whether it's an economic forecast or demand planning, because most of us have never lived through a global pandemic before. So things have got a little unique, and it's been a little tougher, but we can still take data and we can still take the predictions of experts and make good forecasts or reasonable forecasts. Forecasts are always going to be a little bit off, just by nature. All forecasts are off by a little bit. But by taking all the data, hopefully we can make good, educated decisions. So an example of an economic forecast that I participate in is I am part of the Institute of Supply Chain Management's Report on Business. And every month when this report comes out, the stock market reacts to my survey data. I am on the healthcare panel now. There's 200 of us around the country. We give our opinion on how the health of the business and the economy is. And the funny thing about this survey that I'm on, it actually asks very simple questions. It says, is inventory going up or down? Are prices going up or down? Are supplier deliveries getting faster or slower? And these are all very easy for me to answer. I know if my inventory is going up. I know if prices are getting worse or if they're getting better. I know if people are delivering to me quicker or slower. So they're easy for me to answer. But when you take all of that data and you put it together, it makes sense. So think about this for a second. If I say inventory is going up, prices are going down, and deliveries are getting faster from our suppliers. If I were to say those 3 things, do you believe that the economy is getting better or the economy is getting worse? Well, the economy is getting worse. If inventory is going up, it means that the products that I planned on using or selling are not selling as quickly as they were in the past. If prices are going down, it means that vendors are trying to aggressively sell their products by giving discounts and price breaks. So they're giving better prices in the hopes that they will move their inventory. If deliveries are getting faster, it means that my suppliers don't have the backlog that they used to. So something that might have taken them a few weeks to get me now only takes me a couple days. It means that they don't have the backlog that they used to in their manufacturing. So all of those are indicators that the economy is getting worse. If you flip that upside down and you say if inventory is going down, prices are going up, and deliveries are getting slower, then it means the economy is picking up and it's getting better because I'm burning through my inventory. Vendors feel comfortable charging more because their products are in demand, and deliveries are slower because their backlog has increased. So those are all things you can look at to make an economic forecast. Technological forecasts are long-term forecasts concerned with the rates of technological progress. This really helps us to develop new products, plants, equipment, and looking at those type of technological advances. So you need to be very careful if you're in an industry where technology is changing quickly. If technology is changing quickly, then you have to be very cautious making your long-term forecasts because things are going to change. If you're in an industry where there aren't that many technological advances, then you can look further out and not worry about a product becoming obsolete. So those are technological forecasts. Demand forecasts are what we're going to talk about in the remainder of this chapter, and that's when we make projections of a company's sales for each period in the planning horizon. So demand forecasts are demand driven. So we're looking at historical data, and we're going to make a prediction going forward of how many products we're going to need. It helps us to make better decisions in supply chain, human resources, capacity, because it will help us to know how many products we want to buy, how many people we want to have on hand, and how much capacity we need to have to build and produce our products. So that's how demand forecasts help us in the future with planning for supply chain, human resources, and capacity. Okay, features of a forecast. Just a couple fun things to mention about forecasts. We assume that the past will equal the future. So when we're looking at data, if we see trends where things are going up, then we assume that there will be a causal relationship and it will continue to go up. Forecasts are rarely perfect because of randomness. So things happen, right? Some months might be good, some months might be bad, and it could just be random variation in the data. So we've got to be able to look at that data, realize that they're outliers, and then make plans accordingly with our estimates. Forecasts are more accurate for groups versus individuals. If you think about a car dealership, they know, okay, I'm going to sell 50 cars per month. 50 cars per month. But they don't know the breakdown between cars, minivans, trucks, large trucks, as well as they do the overall aggregated whole. And that's because when someone comes into their dealership, people aren't always decided on what they're going to buy. Maybe if I go into a dealership and I say, I want to buy a truck, and I get there and I fall in love with a large truck, then I'll buy that truck instead. Or maybe my wife, she goes over to the minivan and heaven forbid she falls in love with it. Maybe we walk away with a minivan that day. So we still bought a car from that lot, but not necessarily the one that they were planning on or the one that we were planning on. So when you make forecasts for groups, it's more accurate versus individuals. And then forecast accuracy decreases as your time horizon increases. Another good example, just again, a car dealership can predict pretty good what they're going to sell for the next couple months. They have no idea what they're going to be selling 10 years from now. So your forecast accuracy decreases as your time horizon gets further and further away. Okay, the book talks about 7 steps in forecasting. I'm going to throw on an 8th step. But the first step is determine the use for the forecast. What am I trying to forecast? Am I trying to predict next month's supply, or am I trying to predict next month's demand? What am I trying to forecast? Then we must select the items to be forecasted. We want to look at the time horizon. So am I looking 1 month out or 3 months out or 1 year out? Select the forecasting model. We're going to go over about 6 or 7 different models in this chapter. So whatever you determine is the best one for you is the one that you'll use. We're going to gather all of that historical data. And maybe some qualitative data as well. So we're going to gather all of our data to help us make that forecast. Step 6, you do actually make the forecast. Step 7 is validate and implement the results. So after you've created your forecast, then you're going to implement whatever it is that you have predicted going forward. Now, I would throw in the 8th step, which is to monitor your forecasting performance using some of the techniques like measuring forecast error, and then make revisions as necessary, because if you're not using the best forecasting method, change it up, get a different one, start over, and do it again. Because ultimately you want your forecasting error to be as small as possible, and so there are different kinds of forecasting methods you can incorporate to make that forecast better and better every time. Okay, so the basic forecasting methods. We are going to go over qualitative methods and quantitative methods. So in this video, in this lecture recording, we're going to talk about the qualitative methods next. But in many of our other videos, we're going to be going into the quantitative methods. And so those are our time series methods. So there'll be a completely different video on moving averages, one on exponential smoothing, one on trend projections, another one on linear regression. And so we'll just kind of go over all those qualitative time series type models in other lecture recordings. But for today, in this video, we're going to go over some of the qualitative methods, which can be used in conjunction with quantitative methods as well. So just so that I don't forget to say it on a future slide, historically, I have always, whenever I've been responsible for the forecasting at my facility, I have always taken qualitative methods and quantitative methods, combined them together to make my forecasts. I have used Salesforce Composite, and I've used the Delphi method, and I've used some of those other qualitative methods, and I've also used the quantitative time series methods where I'm looking at historical data to make the best forecast that I can. Because ultimately it doesn't matter what method I use, I just want my forecast to be right. I just want it to be right. So I'll use whatever method works best. But many times what I have found is using a combination of both is the best bet. So let's briefly talk about some of the qualitative methods of forecasting. The first one is the jury of executive opinion. Okay. Actually, before we get into jury of executive opinion, let's rewind here just a second and talk about the qualitative forecasts and what they are. So these are forecasts that incorporate such factors as the decision maker's intuition, their emotions, their personal experiences, and their value systems. So emotions and intuition, right? When we're thinking about what's going to happen in the future, if I'm a professional salesperson, I am always thinking about what does my future look like? How many products are we going to sell? Who should my target audience be? How should we change up our marketing plan? So they're constantly thinking about how can we go about improving sales. So therefore, they're going to have an opinion on what the forecast should be. That's emotional to them. Maybe it's a little bit intuitive to them. Personal experiences could be if you're selling homes or cars, you know that there are times when sales are good and when sales are bad. Right? There's seasons that we need to take into consideration as well. So these are personal experiences that might sway someone when making a forecast to change their opinion one way or another. So that's a qualitative forecast. When you take all of those factors, you incorporate them together based off of the decision maker's intuitions, their feelings, and their experiences. So a jury of executive opinion. This is a forecasting technique that uses the opinion of high-level managers to form a group estimate of demand. An example of this could be the Fed, where they all get together, they talk about what they feel, what they see, the data that they've analyzed, and then they make a decision on what interest rates should be going forward. So that's an example of jury of executive opinion. The Delphi method is a forecasting technique using a group process that allows experts to make forecasts. So you're still using experts, but this time it's different. You're going to ask those experts, here are 4 options, option A, B, C, and D. Which one do you think is going to happen in the future? And some people will come back and say A, some people will come back and say B, some people will come back and say C. And after they figure out the 2 most likely scenarios, they'll say, okay, we've narrowed it down to A and D. So between A and D, now all of you 50 people vote again. Let's narrow it down again. So the Delphi method is a narrowing it down method, going from many options down to a few options. Because if someone's first choice, like in my example of B or C, gets eliminated, now they would get to pick between options A and D about what they believe going forward. So that's the Delphi method. A Salesforce Composite is a forecasting technique based on the salesperson's estimates of expected sales. So you just go to your salespeople, hey Bob, hey Jill, what do you think sales are going to be next month? And you literally talk it through with them and just say, okay, you think we're going to sell 30 cars? Great. Why? Tell me why. Okay, you think we're going to sell 35 cars next month. Why? Tell me why. And you're getting their opinion and their estimates based off of their professional experience. I have personally always used a Salesforce composite in addition to the quantitative data that I gather. Consumer market survey is a forecasting method that solicits input from customers or potential customers regarding future purchasing plans. So if you've ever received a phone call from a telemarketer saying, hey, do you plan to switch cell phone carriers next month? And who would it be and why? Right? That's a consumer market survey. They're trying to gather data from the market. So they're calling you to get that data. Okay, qualitative or judgmental forecasting methods. These are great when there's no historical data available, when only judgmental forecasting is possible. So if you're a new business, you don't have historical data. You can't go back and look at years worth of data because you don't have any. So you have to make a qualitative forecast. The other reasons why qualitative forecasts are useful and very good to use is that you can incorporate unusual or one-time events. So if you see some randomness or some outliers in your data where 1 month was terrible because we had our first worldwide global quarantine for a month and your sales were completely gone, well, that's an unusual event that you might want to take out of the data. But quantitatively, you don't know. Qualitative, that's where you're going to understand, okay, we know that that's what was happening, so we need to take that data out when we're looking forward because that was an unusual or one-time event. Another reason why judgmental methods are good is if you do not have a whole bunch of quantitative data. So, or if you don't have experts who can analyze that data. Not all organizations are the same. Sometimes a qualitative forecast is all you need. You get people together, you talk about what you think next month's sales are going to be, and then that's what you forecast. But if you don't have all of the data or you don't have that expertise, then you can't go and do some of the quantitative methods that we're going to discuss next. But the thing I really want to stress about qualitative forecasting is if you've got the quantitative data, still think of ways which you can qualitatively get some inputs as well, because when you combine the two, you're going to make far greater forecasts going forward that are more accurate. Okay, so the quantitative methods, again, we'll talk about these various time series and regression models in some of the other lecture recordings, but the time series that we're going to review are moving averages, weighted moving averages, exponential smoothing, trend projections. We're going to do all of those, and those are time series models that we're going to be looking at. So for us to do those future forecasting methods, we need to understand what the time series are. So a time series is a forecasting technique that uses a series of past data points to make a forecast going forward. So we're going to analyze and break down those components and project them forward. So we're looking at past historical data. We're going to make projections for the future. So a trend, which is not a fad, a trend is the underlying pattern or growth, the underlying pattern of growth or decline. So are my sales getting worse or are my sales getting better? An example of an easy trend might be the loss of manufacturing jobs in America, right? A couple of lectures ago, we looked at that one slide where it's historically, every decade, we're just losing more and more manufacturing jobs, or agriculture jobs has dramatically shrunk. Those are trends. Those are not fads. Those things are not coming back. So that's an underlining pattern that we're seeing. This is when there's persistent or overall upward or downward patterns, and it's typically due to changes in population, technology, age, culture, and it's typically over several years as well. So that's a trend. Cyclical patterns are regular patterns in a data series that take place over long periods of time. So great examples of cyclical patterns would be, generally we see housing pricing that goes up for 6 to 8 years and then it goes down for a couple. Then it goes up for 6 to 8 years and then it goes down for a couple. Same thing with the stock market. It has a couple great years and then it'll have a bad year, and then a couple great years and then a bad year. These are repeated up and down movements affected by business cycle, political events, and other economic factors, and they can be multiple years duration as well. So that is a cyclical pattern. Next is random variation or noise. This is unexplained deviations from a predictable pattern. So you can see on the bottom right of your screen that little blip right here. That is noise in the typical upward trend that that this forecast is seeing. There is a random variation there, so there's a blip in the data. And again, if you're the one analyzing that data, you can choose if you want to take that blip out or not. An example of this in my current industry is my employer. Although I oversee the supply chain team, we also consult with hospitals on how to properly utilize blood. Okay, properly utilize blood. So surgeons go to school, and one of their classes is on blood transfusions. And so we work with hospitals like Sharp Healthcare in San Diego and Scripps and UCSD, and we work with them to utilize yet less blood during surgeries. Okay, so if someone comes in and they're getting some kind of body replacement and you need to get blood put into you, we want them to use less blood because then there's lower risk of infection and it costs them less money. They actually have to buy blood. They buy it from the blood banks like San Diego Blood Bank, American Red Cross. When you donate blood for free, they then test it, make sure that it's clean, and then they sell it to the hospitals, and it's very expensive. So we help them to use less blood. So an example of what could look like in a random variation is with our customers, we see that blood utilization going down month over month, year over year, and every once in a while you see an enormous spike, and then it goes right back to normal. And what that spike is, it can be a natural disaster. It can be a major car accident where a bunch of people are seriously hurt. It can be when a bunch of people get shot, and so they are bleeding, and the surgeons are trying to keep them alive, and they're pumping them with blood. So they're using up all the blood that they've got in inventory, and they're even asking other hospitals for blood. So you see that blip. That's a random variation. Maybe it's a little gruesome of an example, but hey, I work in healthcare, so that's the example I've got for you. But that is a random variation for the data that I see a lot of times today. Okay, and last but not least on this slide is when looking at time series, seasonal patterns. These are repeatable periods of ups and downs over short periods of time. So seasonal patterns is just like it sounds. Do your sales of ice cream go down in the winter? They probably do. Do your rentals of surfboards go up in the summer? Yeah, they probably do. So those are seasonal patterns. They are repeatable periods during the seasons. And a season does not just have to be an actual season like you think of it. Okay, so that's the easiest way to think of it. But seasons, there's actually 6 different common seasonality patterns. And so we need to, when you're thinking of a season can be a day. It can be a week, or a month, or a quarter, or even a year. So when you look at the period length on the far left, you've got within a week, if your season is a day, then there's 7 seasons in that week. If you're looking at a month, and you're looking at months or weeks within a month, there are 4 weeks in that month. That can be considered a season. A lot of businesses have a very bad first week of the month, and sales get better and better as the month progresses because they do different marketing ploys, they have giveaways, they have discounts, so they can consider each week a season. If you're looking at the period length of a year, you can look at 52 weeks or 12 months or 4 quarters. All of these can be considered seasons, looking at seasonal patterns. So don't just assume that a season means winter, spring, summer, fall. Okay, that isn't the only season out there. There are actually 6 common seasonal patterns. Okay, now let's just quickly take all of these different time series in these seasons and let's put them all in one chart together. So you can see for this organization, their actual demand line is the light blue line. Okay, the light blue line. You can see that over the course of the last 4 years, there is a trend that their sales or their demand have gone up. So that dark blue line, the trend, when you average that trend, things are going well for them. You can see on the light blue line, there was a random variation at once. So sales dropped at a little after a year. Maybe that was a COVID quarantine, who knows, right? But they had a random variation when there was a dramatic loss in the demand for their products. You can see over the course of these last 4 years that during the middle of each year, let's just call that the summer, that their sales or their demand went up. So that's a seasonal peak. So for them, it would appear summer was good and winters were bad. And then the last thing to take in mind, because this is what you should not do, is the red line is the average. If you were forecasting the demand for this product or service going forward and you just took an average of the last 4 years, you would be off by a lot. You would be expecting your demand to be here when truly your sales are going to be up here. okay? The trend is that your demand for your product is going up, so don't just take averages, especially for this kind of long time series. That would be a very poor forecasting method. So, but it's still relevant to point out because you don't want to take that average, right? And that's why it would be so bad to do that if you're making this forecast. So, in conclusion, forecasting in practice. So let's just wrap up forecasting 101 with just a couple things about forecasting. So I've already mentioned this a couple times, but managers use a variety of judgmental and quantitative forecasting techniques. Take the best of what you've got. Take all the data you've got, because the goal is to make a really good forecast, and people who have opinions and expertise can really help you take the data and make sense of it. So use many methods. Use as many methods as you can to make that best forecast. Statistical methods alone cannot account for such factors as sales promotions, competitive advantage, unusual economic disturbances, new products. So data tells a story, but it doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't give us the fine print. So we need to be able to understand when we see sales go up or sales go down, or we see these trends or these variations in data, we need to be able to make sense of them. And so when we ask people for their judgmental, qualitative opinions, we're going to help to be able to piece together some of the story and make better use of the data that we've got. The first step in developing our forecasts is to understand the purpose, time horizon, and level of aggregation. So before you start crunching numbers, you got to think about, what am I trying to accomplish? What's the best method for doing so? And what data do I need to help me make that forecast? And lastly, different forecasting methods require different levels of technical ability and understanding of mathematical principles and assumptions. We're going to go over a lot of different quantitative type of forecasting methods in these next few lecture recordings. Some of them are very easy, like a moving average. Pretty simple stuff. Pretty easy math. You can do that, and you can figure out the next couple of months forecast that you want to put together. Some of these, like exponential smoothing or seasonal indexing or the regression models with correlation, those are more complicated. And not everyone in your organization is going to understand them. So you need to understand that there are easier types of forecasts and harder types of forecasts, and depending on the organization that you're in, which model you want to use to make the best forecast going forward. All right, so this concludes our overview of forecasting. We've discussed some of the various quantitative and qualitative methods that are available. In our remaining videos on this chapter, we're going to dive into the quantitative or time series forecasting models, beginning with our next one, which is on moving averages and the naive forecasting